Welcome to Soul Searching Space, a space to remember who you truly are, who you came here to be, and what you came here to do. To be crystal clear, going from black and white thinking to full color HD, working from the inside out, reclaiming your power, waking up to your inherent wholeness, aligning soul, heart, mind, and body. Hello, and thank you for tuning in. We are continuing the conversations of working from the inside out. If you haven't tuned in to the previous episodes in this series, I invite you to listen as it builds on top of each other. We are who we are and where we are because of our beliefs about ourselves. These beliefs are the thoughts we keep consciously or unconsciously, and whether we are aware of them or not, they still affect our reality. We are not our thoughts. We are also not our core beliefs. The more we learn about the childhood brain and how these core beliefs formed, the better able we will be over time to witness and become aware of them, and ultimately actively choose which ones we want to retain and which ones to leave behind. There's a lot of us that get this message that you must be a certain way in order to get the attention and the love you need foundationally. So it becomes very transactional in a way. We feel that we can't just be ourselves. We feel like we need to play a role, and if I'm not playing that role, then there is a price to pay. Mom or dad might stop talking to me. I might not get the love and attention that I need. So we all adapted in these ways, the best way we knew how. What we want to understand is that we are actually living a pattern. We are the pattern. We are playing a pattern. We are playing a role. We are playing a persona. We are playing a character. We become the ego because we believe we are the persona we adapted in order to cope with our childhood. Once we realize that it is our own internal voice that is telling us to behave in a certain way or to follow certain rules, we can lessen our reaction to people or situations. We can address the fear within us that is triggering feelings of insecurity and unworthiness. Where we place our energy is where we place our attention. To empower ourselves, we will have to examine everything we have manifested and created up until this point. We will become aware of our beliefs about life, ourselves, others, and basically everything. As we start observing all aspects of our present reality, we can notice and observe the programs that primarily operates below the level of our conscious awareness. As we go within and look at these elements we probably haven't been aware of before, we can pay attention to our unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and reactions, and more. We can question them and determine if they are true and whether we want to continue to give them our energy. It takes will and heightened awareness to become familiar with our unconscious states, behaviors, thoughts, and more. When we become aware, we become more attentive. And as we become more attentive, we will be more conscious. when we expand our consciousness and awareness, we will notice more. And when we notice more, we have a greater ability to observe the self and others, both inner and outer elements of our reality. Ultimately, the more we observe, the more we awaken from the states of the unconscious mind into conscious awareness. That's why we've been diving into different aspects, layers, perspectives in the previous episodes in this series, because we are multidimensional beings and there are so many layers to us, and we all have different levels of awareness. As we become aware of our thoughts running through our mind, then we can see how repetitive they are. Then we get to see the evidence of those neural pathways, of those conditioned beliefs that caused us to react in familiar ways. As we become self-aware, we no longer allow any thought, action, or emotion we don't want to experience to pass by our awareness. In time, our ability to consciously choose how we want to respond will stop the same firing and wiring of the old neural pathways that are related to the familiar reactive ways of being. And as a result of not recreating the same thoughts, and by interrupting these feelings and emotions that are associated with those thoughts, we are changing our brain to operate in different ways. As we become familiar with all aspects of ourselves, we will ultimately become more conscious and aware. As you become more aware, you may have noticed and observed more things, and it may have felt like you were being triggered more than usual. Sometimes when we are healing, it can feel like we are going backwards because we feel everything, we feel more, and it can be very uncomfortable. That's why it's very important to learn to regulate our nervous system. To notice and observe those filters that are coloring our perception. How am I being, or what am I reacting from in that moment? None of that is possible until we first learn how it feels to be present in ourselves, in our own presence, in whatever moment it is we are living and experiencing. So now that we went through many different layers, what would you say is your familiar self? How have you been programmed? What are your stories? What are your realities? What are your roles? What timelines are interfering with where you are headed? What is your dominant question? What are your biases? What are your beliefs about genes? What have you practiced so many times that many times your body knows and remembers better than your brain. What are you emotionally addicted to? What prevents you from embodying who you truly are, independent of conditions in your environment? How do you experience your familiar self? What does your familiar self think? What does it feel like to be your familiar self? What are some of the patterns, behaviors, habits, attitudes, and more that you have become aware of? What events in the external world activates that program of your familiar self? Which ways of being can you embody independent of conditions in your external world? Which ways of being has become natural to you? Which ways of being is familiar to you? Which routines and rituals cause you to plug into your familiar self? What is the automatic state of being that you have manifested and created? Which familiar states have become familiar to you? Which familiar states of being do you automatically embody? Which familiar self is a full embodied practice for you? What are you grateful for, and where is there room to grow and evolve? What does this familiar self feel like when you are thinking and acting on behalf of this familiar self? Can you recognize when a particular self is running the show and you went from being present to running familiar patterns? How do you know it's your familiar self? Which familiar states don't you have to think about? You just know this is your familiar self. Which familiar states have you practiced so many times that it has become second nature and you don't have to think about it? What experiences made you feel very different from your familiar self? Which experiences woke you up from the familiar self, thinking and feeling in predictable ways? Which experiences made you become more aware in the present moment? Where are you able to interrupt the familiar patterns of the familiar self? Where are you currently unable to interrupt the familiar patterns of the familiar self? Have you become aware of who you no longer want to be and who you want to be instead? Where in your life have you become aware of or noticed who you are being and therefore become conscious of your unconscious self? Is your familiar self who you think you are in relation to everything and everyone around you? Which automatic programs work to cover the vulnerable parts of you? Is your familiar self who you truly are and who you would love to be? What actions are driving the behavior of your familiar self? What have you learned about yourself? What are you learning about yourself? Are you able to live on your own terms versus being driven by the patterns of your lineage and what you were taught as a child? What are your reasons for not being where you want to be? Are they stories? Are they narratives that you are sharing with yourself on repeat that you say it so often you have so much evidence for it? What are your thoughts about yourself and your world? Where did these thoughts come from? Whose voices do you play in your mind? Whose voice is this? Is it yours, your parents, your caregivers, society, culture? What information reinforces what you already believe to be true? Which evidence supports your beliefs? Which practice thoughts have become truth? What patterns have you noticed and observed as you have been doing the work? What limiting beliefs have you become aware of? Which limiting ways of thinking is holding you back from the life you want to create? How do you want to move forward? Did something resonate with you? Who are you going to be and what are you going to do about it? Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for your time and thank you for your presence. I look forward to being with you again. I am sending you so much love. And until next time, may you remember that when you can become aware of or notice and observe who you are being, you are becoming conscious of your unconscious self.